The day I realized my parents kept breaking into my apartment wasn't the day everything fell apart. It was the day I understood just how far they were willing to go. I'd come home to lights I never turned on food. I never cooked blankets shaped by bodies that weren't mine. Every corner whispered that I wasn't living alone at all. People think family crosses lines out of love. But what if crossing lines becomes the only way they know how to hold you? Because the moment I finally disappeared, that's when the real story began. I wasn't always this cautious. There was a time I believed boundaries were simple. You draw a line, people respect it. But in my family, a line was just something to step over. Maybe that's why at 29 I still flinched when my phone lit up with my mother's name, or when my father's voice slipped into that soft, guilt-laced tone he used whenever he wanted something quietly surrendered. Growing up, privacy was a fantasy I watched other kids enjoy. My bedroom door might as well have been made of glass. Mom Evelyn walked in whenever she pleased, sometimes humming, sometimes silent, always searching. She'd pick up notebooks, skim pages, ask questions masked as concern. "You hide too much," she'd say, though she never stopped to consider why I felt the need to hide it all. Dad Thomas never interfered. He'd shrug, mutter something about keeping the peace, then let her keep going. Meanwhile, my younger sister Liana lived like royalty in a kingdom built from exceptions. Her room was off limits. Her mess was called creativity. Her mistakes were phases. Mine were warnings. Ours was a house with two sets of rules, one lenient, one suffocating, and I grew up knowing exactly which set belonged to me. So when I finally moved out into a one-bedroom apartment overlooking the Denver skyline, I thought I'd crossed some invisible threshold into adulthood. I bought my own dishes, arranged my bookshelf the way I liked, hung soft string lights that made the evenings feel calmer than anything I'd known. I breathed differently there, slower, deeper, as if my lungs finally trusted the air around them. But that peace didn't last long. The first time Mom let herself in, she acted like it was a surprise visit, carrying groceries she never asked if I wanted. She put on an apron she pulled from her purse, and started cooking like she'd been waiting all week for the chance. Dad settled onto my couch, claiming he just wanted to see the view, though his eyes kept drifting to my mail on the counter. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, an overstep she'd correct once I explained. But explaining to my mother had never changed anything before. It didn't now. Then came the smaller violations. Containers moved. Clothes I hadn't worn in months, suddenly in the laundry basket. A faint imprint on my pillow. Liana borrowing my sweater without asking. My laptop screen left open to tabs I didn't recognize. Each incident was small enough to excuse, but together they felt like a tide rising under my feet. I knew the pattern. I'd lived it before. And just like when I was a teenager, my mother called it love, my father called it protection, and I was supposed to call it normal. Except this time, it wasn't their house. It was mine. And deep down, I already sensed something I wasn't brave enough to admit yet. If I didn't stop them soon, they'd take this place from me too. One unlocked door, one excuse, one intrusion at a time. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was slow, quiet, like a draft slipping through a window you thought was sealed. I'd come home from work and notice something barely off a cabinet left open. Spices rearranged, my folded towels suddenly stacked edge out instead of edge in. Harmless things, easy to dismiss. But that's how my mother worked. Not with storms, but with breezes that eventually became winds strong enough to push you back into place. One Thursday evening, I returned to find my refrigerator reorganized the way she used to do it at home, produce on-top proteins in the middle temptation foods tucked behind everything else. The frozen meals I bought for busy weeks were gone. In their place sat jars of her soups, her dressings, her preferences, a curated life, hers not mine. I stood there with the cold air spilling out, realizing I wasn't imagining any of this. I was being managed. Then there was Liana. She treated my apartment like a bonus level in a video game she already owned. I'd catch traces of her everywhere, mascara smudges near my mirror, half-finished iced coffee cups in my sink clothes tossed over the back of my chair. When I confronted her, she'd laugh it off. "Relax, Riley. You act like I'm a stranger." She always said it like I was unreasonable, like the problem wasn't her crossing lines, but me wanting them respected. But the moment that snapped the last thread of denial came 2 weeks later. I walked in after a long day, hoping for silence, only to find my laptop open on the coffee table. Pages of notes I hadn't written sat on the screen, searches I didn't make, windows I didn't open. And then, as if to leave proof, one of my project drafts sat half-clicked, as though someone had started reading but got bored halfway through. My chest tightened. I called my mom. She picked up immediately. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be dramatic," she said when I asked if she'd been there. "Your landlord let me in. I told him you hadn't been answering me and I was worried." "Honestly, you should be grateful someone's looking out for you." Something inside me iced over. "Mom," I whispered, "you lied to get into my home." "That's not lying. It's concern. You work too hard. You isolate. You need support." Support. That word felt like a trap closing. After we hung up, I sat on the floor, back against the couch, letting the weight of everything settle. Every memory from childhood, the opened journals, the monitored texts, the tracked locations flooded back in one suffocating wave. This wasn't new. This was the same pattern, revived and emboldened. The next morning, I couldn't focus at work. I booked a therapy session during lunch. My therapist listened, then leaned forward and said gently, "Riley, this isn't concern. It's enmeshment. These aren't accidents, they're boundary violations." It was the first time someone named what I'd been too scared to articulate. "Your home isn't safe," she added softly. "Not emotionally, not psychologically. You need distance they can't override." I walked out into the cold Denver air with one thought repeating like a heartbeat. If I stay here, they'll never stop. Once the truth settled, the kind of truth that doesn't knock but barges straight through your chest, I knew staying meant surrendering. My therapist's words kept echoing. You need distance they can't override. She didn't mean a conversation or a firmer tone or another doomed attempt at setting boundaries. She meant escape. Real, physical, trace-proof distance. So I did something I never imagined doing. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, opened my laptop, and typed 4 words into the search bar: secure apartment buildings, Denver. Scrolling through listings, I realized how small my world had been. I had spent years believing privacy was a privilege other people got to enjoy. But that night, for the first time, privacy felt like something I could choose. I found a building downtown, keycard access, staffed lobby cameras in every hallway, elevators that required authorization just to move. A place where no one could charm their way inside, not even my mother. I scheduled a tour for the next morning. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I knew. The warm lighting, the quiet hum of air vents, the polished floors reflecting the city lights. It felt like a place built for people who needed walls as much as they needed air. The leasing agent showed me a corner unit with tall windows and a locked balcony. I stood there, imagining a silence that belonged solely to me. I signed the lease before my fear could talk me out of it. The move had to happen in secret. No chance for my mother to guilt me, no space for Liana to turn it into a spectacle. Just action. Clean, irreversible action. Mara and Jonah offered to help the moment I told them, showing up after midnight with hoodies and gloves like we were planning a heist. "Tell me again why we're whispering," Jonah murmured as we taped boxes. "Because if they show up," I whispered back, "I won't be able to leave." We packed everything, clothes, books, kitchenware, quietly, methodically. I left behind anything that felt too recognizable. Mugs my mom bought for my own good sweaters, Liana claimed were hers, until she felt generous. Frames Dad insisted I hang to make the place feel like home. I wanted nothing they could claim. At 2 a.m, the moving truck rumbled softly outside. We loaded my life in the dark, each trip down the hallway feeling like a countdown. When the truck pulled away, I locked the door one last time and slid the emergency key my mother once waved like a badge into an envelope addressed to the landlord. No explanation. No forwarding address. At the new building, the night staff checked my ID, handed me a sleek black key card, and welcomed me by name. That small gesture felt like a quiet revolution. As I stepped into my new apartment, the door clicking shut behind me, one line formed sharply in my mind, so I moved without telling them. Not out of spite, not out of rebellion, but because disappearing was the only way to finally become visible to myself. For the first 3 days in my new apartment, I kept my phone on silent and turned face down. I let the world shrink to the steady hum of the building, the soft echo of my footsteps on hardwood floors, the unfamiliar comfort of knowing every sound inside these walls came from me and only me. I slept without jolting awake. I cooked without wondering who would rearrange my ingredients when I wasn't looking. It felt like oxygen I hadn't breathed in years, but peace in my family never lasted long. On the morning of day 4, I finally flipped my phone over. The screen lit up like a warning flare, dozens of missed calls, frantic texts, voicemails stacked with timestamps only minutes apart. My mother, my father, Liana. Even numbers I didn't recognize, likely neighbors from my old building. Riley answer immediately. "This isn't funny. Where are you? We're coming. Call us. Right now." And then Liana's post on social media. "My sister is missing. Please pray she comes home." Missing. The irony almost made me laugh, but the longer I scrolled, the more I sensed this wasn't just panic, it was spiraling. I set the phone down, trying to slow my breathing when it rang again. Unknown number. Something told me to pick up. "Is this Riley Morgan?" a calm voice asked. "Yes, this is Officer Ramirez with the Denver Police Department. Are you safe at the moment?" My stomach dropped, but my voice stayed steady. "I am. I'm calling because members of your family were involved in an incident at your former residence. We need you to come down to the station to verify a few details." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "What happened? They attempted to enter your old apartment," she said carefully. "The tenants inside believed it was a break-in." "Of course they did. My family didn't knock. They never had." "I'll come right away," I said. When I entered the station, the fluorescent lights hummed over rows of chairs, the scent of stale coffee drifting from somewhere behind the front desk. A receptionist directed me to a small conference room, and as I stepped inside, the scene hit me like a slap. My mother sat at the table, mascara smudged, tears streaking her cheeks in uneven lines. My father hovered beside her, jaw-clenched eyes darting toward the doorway as I appeared, and Liana paced in the corner, arms folded, her face blotchy from crying or from being caught. It was hard to tell. The moment my mother saw me, she gasped, standing so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "Riley! Oh my God, where have you been? We thought you were dead." Her voice trembled, but beneath the panic I recognized something else. Accusation, as if my disappearance had been a personal attack against her. I didn't move closer. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "You shouldn't have been at my apartment." "That's not your apartment anymore," my father muttered, as if that somehow justified it. Officer Ramirez entered, then calm and steady. "Let's all sit," she said. My mother sniffled dramatically and collapsed back into her chair, clutching tissues like props. I remained standing until the officer motioned me into the seat across from them. "Ms. Morgan," she began, "we need to clarify your whereabouts and well-being because your family reported you missing." "I wasn't missing," I said. "I moved." "You moved." My mother repeated, her voice breaking. "Without telling us, without telling me." Her hurt tone would have gutted me once. Now it sounded like a familiar trap being sprung. "Yes," I answered simply. Liana rolled her eyes. "You're being ridiculous, Riley. If you had just told us, none of this would have happened." Officer Ramirez cleared her throat. "Let's revisit what did happen. According to the tenants and witnesses, your family attempted to force entry into a unit that wasn't theirs." "That's a lie," my mother snapped. "We thought Riley was inside. We were trying to save her." By climbing onto someone's balcony, the officer asked evenly. Liana shifted uncomfortably. I slipped. It wasn't like a break-in. My father rubbed his temple. "We were desperate. Our daughter vanished. What were we supposed to think?" "You're supposed to respect her privacy," the officer said. "She's an adult. Her absence is not a crime." The moment I stepped into the ballroom, every conversation snapped to silence. My sister stood under the chandelier, microphone lifted, wearing that sharp little smile she saves for nights she plans to win. She'd spent weeks hiring private investigators desperate to prove I'd been lying about my company. And tonight at our grandmother's birthday, she was ready to humiliate me in front of everyone. I saw it in her eyes, the confidence, the certainty, the thrill of finally watching me fall. But what my sister didn't know was simple. The investigation hadn't stopped with me, and the agents were already walking toward her. My name is Riley Hale, and I learned early that in my family presence didn't guarantee visibility. You could sit at the same table, breathe the same air, hear the same conversations, yet somehow still be the person no one remembered to look at. I wasn't ignored out of malice. I was ignored out of habit. My father, Mr. Hale, the type who built his authority on tradition, always assumed I'd eventually fall in line with whatever version of success he respected. My mother, Mrs. Hale, managed the emotional temperature of the house the way people manage thermostats. Quiet adjustments, guilt phrased as concern, expectations wrapped in soft voices. And my sister, the polished center of it all, understood exactly how to maintain her shine. She took their approval as naturally as breathing. I didn't resent them for it. Not then. I simply adapted. While my sister collected praise in front of guests, I sat in corners with a laptop balanced on my knees, building things no one asked for, but things I couldn't stop myself from creating. I wasn't loud about it. I didn't know how to be. My strength came in the form of late nights, clean code, silent progress. By the time I finished college, the path between us was already carved. She hosted charity events. I built security systems. She posed for photos with sponsors. I debugged infrastructure in apartments I could barely afford. My parents called her dependable, responsible, the pride of our family. They called me talented, but with the tone people use for hobbies, children eventually outgrow. I didn't argue. Arguments required an audience, and I had none. Then came the moment 5 years ago that finally defined the roles too clearly to ignore. A dinner with polished cutlery, polite conversation, and the same comparisons that always floated across the table when air grew thin. My father asked about real plans. My mother wondered aloud if I felt lost. My sister leaned back, smiling with the ease of someone who believed she was helping, and said her nonprofit could use an extra pair of hands. Part-time, flexible hours, something I could handle. The room waited for my gratitude. I felt the expectation like weight across my ribs. Instead, I felt something else. A shift, a line, a door. I pushed my chair back. The sound barely registered against the clink of glasses, but my family looked up as if they'd heard an explosion. "Watch me," I said. Then I walked out, not in anger, but in clarity. That night became the border between who I was and who I refused to be again. The message came on a Tuesday morning, buried between contract updates and system alerts. Tessa, my cousin, the only one in the family who still hesitated before judging, sent just 8 words. She hired investigators. She's planning something for the party. I stared at the screen. The steam from my coffee drifting upward, blurring the text for a moment before clearing again. Investigators, not rumors, not whispers. A coordinated attempt. My sister wasn't subtle. She never needed to be. Approval had always cushioned her decisions like airbags. By noon, Nolan Price, my COO, and the closest thing I had to a brother was standing in my office with the expression he saved for breaches and crises. He dropped a folder on the glass table between us. "She didn't hire just anyone," he said. "High-end thorough. The type who can get into any corner of your life." I opened the folder. Pages. Records, notes about my company, my contracts, my personal finances. Nothing damaging because there was nothing to damage. But the implication was clear. She was preparing a narrative long before I even realized I'd been cast in it. Nolan watched me quietly. "She wants to prove you've been lying," he said. "About everything. Your success, your work, your company. She wants to take the whole thing apart." I closed the folder. The city stretched across the window behind him, lights flickering in the cold air. Denver always looked honest from this height, sharp edges, open grids. My family never did. The part that tightened something low in my chest wasn't the investigation. It was the next detail Nolan delivered slowly, like he knew how each word would land. She wants to reveal it at your grandmother's birthday. Publicly. The ballroom, the microphone, the audience. A repeat of the night I walked away, except this time she intended to end the story, not just twist it. I didn't shout. I didn't pace. I didn't even stand. I just rested my fingers on the folder's edge, letting the paper cool under my hand. My sister believed she was uncovering a truth. She didn't realize she was standing on one. I just smiled. I told Nolan more to myself than to him, because the investigation she started had already found something else, something bigger, and it wasn't about me. I didn't tell Nolan everything right away. Some realizations sit too deep, too old to voice the moment they surface. After he left my office, I stayed there alone with the folder, its weight thin but undeniable, while Denver's afternoon light shifted from white to gold to gray. My laptop hummed on the desk. The building's vents whispered. Somewhere on a lower floor, someone laughed, unaware that my sister was scripting a spectacle meant to end me. I opened the folder again, not because I needed to see the contents. I already understood what they were, but because looking at them slowly, page by page, reminded me of the pattern I'd spent years escaping someone else writing my narrative while I stayed quiet. Except this time, silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The records the investigators gathered on me were harmless, clean, expected. But the subtle notes in the margins, the cross-references to financial activity, the unexplained inquiries connected to my sister, that was the part she hadn't accounted for. The investigation she funded had already turned back toward her, and I hadn't lifted a finger. By evening, I was back in my penthouse, city lights scattered across the windows like broken glass frozen mid-air. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and set the folder on the kitchen counter. I didn't bother turning on the main lights, just the soft underglow along the shelves. Enough to think. I opened my laptop. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Not arguments, not defenses. A list, nothing more. Line after line, factual, clean, quiet audit dates. Timeline overlaps. Unexpected withdrawals. Diversions from funds meant for Grandma Miriam's medical expenses. Payments labeled community outreach that led nowhere. Everything factual. Everything verifiable. I wasn't preparing an attack. I was preparing clarity. Around 9, Nolan called. "You eating?" he asked. His voice always carried calm logic even when he was worried. "Later. You're not alone in this." "I know." A pause on the line. "Then let me ask something directly. Are you going to the party?" I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter. The party, the microphone, the spotlight my sister had engineered, the humiliation she rehearsed. 5 years ago, all it took was one dinner to push me out of their orbit. Now it would take only one evening to end their ability to pull me back. "Yes," I said, "I'm going." Nolan exhaled like he'd known the answer long before I admitted it. Before hanging up, he added softly, "Then you should know something. The investigator your sister hired, he already filed mandatory reports with the Attorney General's office. They're moving quickly." The words settled into me with a cold, precise click. She hired the investigation. She funded the digging. She opened the door. And now the consequences were walking through it. I pulled the folder closer and continued typing. My actions weren't loud, just practical. Revisions to internal documents, archived copies of old records, notes for legal counsel if needed, quiet administrative steps that didn't look like revenge. Because they weren't. I wasn't creating a downfall. I was refusing to cushion one. The next morning at the headquarters of my startup, sunlight hit the glass conference room at an angle that made the table look like a mirror. I could see my reflection in the blazer I'd worn, dark, simple, controlled. My laptop sat open with the list I'd made the night before. Nolan entered with a stack of work contracts worth tens of millions across 3 states. Real tangible results of a career I built with no help from the family preparing to accuse me of deceit. He paused when he saw the folder on the table. "You ready?" he asked. Yes, but it wasn't readiness in the way he meant. It was readiness in the sense of having nothing left to defend. When the meeting ended and the building quieted, I sat alone and reviewed my notes again. Not to adjust them, just to acknowledge something that felt new. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for attack. I was watching someone else walk toward the ledge they built themselves. In the late afternoon, I walked the length of the glass hallway. The city beyond reflected against the panels like a second skyline. My footsteps were the only sound. People believe revenge is loud. They're wrong. The most devastating kind is procedural, neutral, bare, carried out by systems that don't care about who cried first. At home again that night, I folded my outfit for the party. Charcoal blazer, clean lines, unmistakable presence, clothes that said nothing, but revealed everything. Before sleeping, I typed one last message to Nolan. "I'm walking in, not hiding." He replied instantly, "Good. Some truths only work when you show up." I set my phone face down, letting the room dim into stillness. This wasn't about proving anything to my family. It wasn't even about confronting my sister. It was about stepping back into a room I once fled, standing where they expected me to break, and letting the truth they uncovered fall exactly where it belonged. The Grand Lodge ballroom looked different the night of my grandmother's birthday. Brighter, louder, full of people who hadn't said my name in 5 years, but somehow still believed they knew who I was. The air hummed with the kind of anticipation families feel before a performance. They just didn't know who was performing. I walked through the entrance without hesitation. The marble floor reflected the chandelier light in sharp, clean fragments. Conversations dipped as I passed. A fork clattered somewhere near the center table. My name card waited at the far end of the room, flipped face down again, intentional. My sister stood at the head table, already holding the microphone. She'd dressed for victory. Her smile confirmed she expected it. When she saw me, her expression tightened for half a second before smoothing into something polished. She tapped the microphone twice, and the noise in the room dissipated into thin air. "Thank you all for being here," she began, glowing under the lights. "Tonight we're celebrating our grandmother, a remarkable woman. But before we do, there's something we need to address." She looked straight at me. My father folded his arms. My mother's chin lifted. Relatives leaned forward, ready for whatever story my sister had assembled from the investigation she commissioned. For months, she said there have been misleading claims circulating about success, accomplishments, and integrity. A ripple passed through the crowd. Eyes landed on me. Expected. And because our family values honesty, she continued, I took it upon myself to verify certain things. There it was, the curtain lifting. She thought she was unveiling me. I stood still at the back wall, arms lightly crossed, observing. No anger, no defense. My sister inhaled, prepared to deliver the final blow she'd rehearsed. But before she could speak, the ballroom doors opened. The sound was small, just a hinge and a shift of air. But it silenced the room more thoroughly than any speech could. 3 city agents stepped inside badges, visible, posture formal. Their presence cut through the chandelier light like a cold current. Conversations died, feet stilled. Someone whispered, "What's happening?" The lead agent scanned the room. "Is Ms. Hale present?" My sister lifted her chin. "Yes," she said, smiling again. "I'm right." The agent's voice didn't waver. "Ms. Hale, you are being detained for questioning regarding diverted donations and misused family funds." The microphone slipped slightly in her grip. "What?" There must be some mistake. But the agents were already approaching. Calm, procedural, unimpressed by pedigree or reputation. Gasps spread like heat through the room. My mother stood face ghost white. My father's jaw clenched so tightly the muscle jumped near his temple. "No," my sister hissed, stepping back. "She's the one lying. She's the one who," the agent cut her off. "We have complete audit records. The report filed by the investigator you hired corroborates the findings." Silence. Perfect, devastating silence. Because the truth was undeniable. The investigation she paid for had exposed only her. As the agent secured a pair of handcuffs around her wrists, the metallic click echoed up into the chandelier, sharp final. Her eyes found mine across the room. Confusion, anger, fear. Not once did I move. Not once did I speak. Grandma Miriam rose from her seat, steady and clear. "I authorized an independent audit months ago," she announced. "Everything will be handled properly." My father stared at her, stunned. My mother swayed slightly, gripping the back of her chair. Cousins whispered. Aunts covered their mouths. The narrative had cracked wide open, and none of them knew how to gather the pieces. The agents guided my sister toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble in short, uneven steps. When she passed me, she slowed just for a second. This was the moment she had intended for me, a public ending, a humiliation framed as truth. Instead, she walked past the person she tried to expose, and I didn't flinch. The ballroom didn't breathe until the doors shut behind her, and for the first time in my life, the silence in that room belonged to me. 18 months later, the memory of that night doesn't arrive as a scene. It arrives as a sound, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing under chandelier light. A sound that used to tighten my chest now lands quietly like a reminder, rather than a wound. Life didn't change all at once after the ballroom. It shifted slowly, the way light moves across a room in the late afternoon, barely noticeable until everything looks different. The building that once housed my sister's nonprofit sits on a quiet street outside Denver. I bought it for a symbolic $1 after the board dissolved, then rebuilt it piece by piece into something else entirely, a digital safety center for kids who've never had access to that kind of protection. The irony isn't lost on me. Some foundations deserve to crumble so others can be built clean. On most mornings, sunlight cuts through the glass lobby in long, steady lines. I stand inside watching young students type their first lines of code or learn how to secure their online accounts. Their laughter fills the halls my sister once used for staged photos and donor meetings. This version of the building feels honest, uncomplicated, real. I still hear from Grandma Miriam. Never demands, just invitations, gentle ones. Last week she emailed Sunday dinner, no pressure. A sentence so simple it felt unfamiliar after years of obligation disguised as affection. I said yes. Driving across Denver that evening, the city felt softer than I remembered. Not because it changed, but because I finally stopped carrying old narratives like they were debts I still owed. At the red light on Colfax, I caught my reflection in the window, calm, steady, unhurried. Not triumphant, just unburdened. People assume justice feels like a victory parade. It doesn't. It feels like space, like air returning to a room you didn't know was suffocating you. After everything, my sister's name still comes up in whispers. Court dates, restitution, the slow machinery of consequences. But none of it tugs at me anymore. Not out of indifference, out of distance. I didn't win by proving them wrong. I won by stepping out of the version of me they insisted was true. And somehow, that quiet liberation became enough. Freedom didn't arrive with applause. It came in the form of quiet mornings, steady breath, and the simple realization that I no longer flinched at my own name. The family I grew up with had tried to define me by absence, by silence, by erasure. But distance taught me something they never expected: boundaries aren't walls. They're doors, ones I get to close or open on my terms. And now every step forward feels earned, calm, and finally mine. If you've ever rebuilt your life from the quiet up, you're not alone. Stay, listen, and join me for the next story.